never imagined that a quiet weekend at my friend's lakeside cabin would turn into the moment everything changed. When I drove back home, the house I'd cared for and loved for 40 years, something felt off the second I pulled into the driveway. The first thing I saw was the lawn. My rose bushes were crushed. The flower pots I had carefully tended, lilies and lavender I planted after my husband passed, were shattered, broken pieces scattered like trash. And there, right in the middle of it all, was a heartbreaking mess: my clothes, old photo albums, and even my husband's fishing rod, all thrown in a heap like garbage. I stepped out of the car, but my knees were shaking so much I had to hold onto the door just to stay standing. I kept thinking, this has to be a mistake, they wouldn't do this to me. But then I saw it, a note taped to the front door, staring at me like a slap in the face. "I'm sorry, Mom. My wife's parents are moving in. There's no room for you anymore. I hope you understand." It was my son's handwriting. Neat and confident, just like the school essays I used to help him with when he was a kid. Across the street, the neighbors just stared. Mrs. Holbrook clutched her gardening gloves to her chest like she didn't know what to do. The Johnson kids sat frozen on their porch, their eyes wide. I could feel their pity, sharp and uncomfortable, like tiny needles against my skin. I walked up to the door and knocked, gently at first. No answer. Then harder. My heart was pounding so fast it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Finally, the door cracked open. My son stood there, eyes avoiding mine. His face looked stiff, almost guilty, like a teenager caught sneaking in late. "Mom, it's better this way," he said quietly. Behind him, his wife appeared, arms crossed like she'd been waiting for this moment. She looked at me like I was a stray dog begging on her porch. "You've had your time here," she said, her voice cold. "We need the space. My parents deserve comfort in their old age." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I tried to remember the last time I asked them for anything, a favor, a bit of help, and I couldn't. I had cooked for them, watched their son when he was sick, gave up my plans and my savings to help with their needs. I babysat, cleaned, sacrificed without complaint. And this was the thanks I got. My son didn't hug me. He didn't say sorry. He just gently pushed the door shut. I heard the lock click, a sharp, final sound that echoed through my whole body. I stood there in the hot June sun, sweat rolling down my back, clutching that note like it was the only thing left tying me to this place. All I could think was, they loved the house more than they ever loved me. And right then, I knew. I was done. Not broken, not beaten, just done. I wiped the tears from my cheeks, grabbed my old suitcase from the pile, and walked away. One small bag. That's all I needed now. I could feel the neighbors watching me, their eyes burning into my back. But for the first time in years, I felt something else, calm. A strange, powerful kind of peace. I found an old bench at the edge of Riverside Park and sat down, holding my suitcase like it was the only solid thing in my life. Birds chirped around me, and the late afternoon sun peeked through the trees. Life went on. Kids ran by laughing. An old man tossed crumbs to pigeons. A young couple argued over a spilled coffee. And me? I just sat there, quiet and invisible. I looked down at my hands, still shaking, still smudged from picking up my photo albums and my husband's fishing rod. These were the same hands that had baked bread every Sunday, planted every flower in our yard, held my grandson's tiny fingers as he learned to walk. I remembered the mornings in that house, the soft light before dawn, my cup of black tea, the smell of fresh earth as I watered the roses in my slippers. I could almost hear my grandson's sleepy voice, "Grandma, can I help you water today?" I gave up so much for them. Trips with friends, birthday parties, even a cruise I'd saved years for. I gave it all to keep their lives running smoothly. And today? They wouldn't even open the door. I pulled out a tissue and wiped my face, pretending it was just the heat making me tear up. A woman walked by and gave me a sympathetic smile. But she didn't stop. I didn't blame her. No one wants to get pulled into someone else's heartbreak. And so I sat there, in the middle of a world that didn't notice I was breaking, finally ready to stop giving everything to people who gave nothing back. As the sun dipped below the trees, my thoughts felt messy, like fog swirling and bumping into itself. But through all that haze, things slowly started to make sense. I began thinking about every little conversation I'd ever had with my daughter-in-law. I remembered how her voice always changed when people were around, suddenly sugary sweet, calling me Mom loud enough for everyone to hear. But when it was just us, her words cut a little sharper. "You shouldn't let him eat so many sweets," she'd say. Or, "Your decorating style is so outdated. We should modernize." There had been signs, so many small comments I brushed off. Jokes about how cozy it would be if her parents ever moved in. Comments about how the house was too big for me, especially after my son lost a client at work. I even remembered her looking me dead in the eye once and saying, when we Finally make this house ours, we'll turn your gardening shed into a guest spa. I laughed it off at the time, thought she was just dreaming out loud. But now that memory felt like someone slowly twisting a knife in my chest. And my son, my sweet boy. The same child who used to curl up on my lap after a long day, who'd come running to me with every scraped knee, had been drifting away for years. Ever since she came into his life, he stopped coming to me for comfort, and started coming for money instead. Every "thank you, Mom" felt a little more hollow, like he was just going through the motions. I thought I was helping. I thought I was holding my family together. But sitting there in the park, I realized the truth: they'd been planning this. Slowly, quietly pushing me out. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because they didn't want me anymore. What they wanted was my house, the home where my husband and I grilled steaks every anniversary, where my grandson first rode a bike, where I planted my first rose bush the year we moved in. I gave a bitter little smile. I had truly believed that family would protect you if you loved them enough. But I was wrong. That ache in my chest wasn't just sadness anymore. It was something stronger, something solid, a decision forming in the pit of my stomach. I looked down at my hands, lit by a flickering street lamp. They were worn and wrinkled, lined with years of hard work. But every scar, every crease, had been earned. I was the one who stayed up all night with a feverish child. I was the one who kept the lights on, the fridge full, the birthday cakes coming, and this was my reward. I took out a folded photo of my grandson from my purse and gently tucked it away. No more lies. No more pretending they didn't mean to hurt me. I stood up slowly, knees stiff but heart steady. Every step I took away from that bench felt a little lighter. I didn't know exactly what was next, but I knew this much: they thought they'd won. They thought they'd gotten rid of me. But they didn't realize that I was just getting started. The next morning, I ended up at a tiny diner tucked behind Main Street. It smelled like burnt coffee and old memories, the kind of place that felt worn but safe. I slid into a corner booth and wrapped my hands around a chipped mug of tea. I didn't even drink it. I just stared out the window, watching people rush by, each lost in their own little world. That's when I heard a voice I hadn't expected. "Martha?" I turned and saw her, Janet, my old friend from the neighborhood committee. She was holding a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon rolls, her eyes wide with surprise, and something else, concern. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she asked, sliding into the booth without waiting for me to say yes. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Janet reached across the table and took my hand. That small gesture, warm, simple, cracked something in me. Just for a second. I felt the tears rise up, but I swallowed them back. "They kicked you out, didn't they?" she whispered. I stared at her, stunned. She leaned in closer. "I wasn't going to say anything," she said softly, "but I overheard your daughter-in-law at the farmer's market a few weeks ago. She was talking about how they were planning to sell the house, once you were out of the way." My stomach dropped. I thought she was joking, Janet continued. "I mean, who says that about their own family?" But the way she said it, like it was already decided. Like you were just a box to check off. I felt a deep, sick twist in my gut. Janet slowly shook her head, and in that moment, I finally understood: I hadn't lost a home. I'd lost people I never really had to begin with. Janet's face twisted with a mix of anger and sadness. "She said they were going to use the money to pay off her parents' debts," she told me. "Said they could finally live in peace and comfort. She even laughed about how easy it was because you trusted them so much." My hands gripped the mug tighter until my knuckles turned white. Janet gently squeezed my fingers again. "I wanted to tell you sooner, Martha. I just didn't know how," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I let out a long, shaky breath. The floor under me felt like it shifted, like I wasn't standing on anything solid anymore. "They loved my money more than they ever loved me," I said quietly. The words tasted bitter, like poison. I didn't even realize I had said them out loud until I saw Janet's eyes soften. And for a moment, I saw my son's little face, round cheeks, wide eyes, always clinging to my hand when something scared him. I saw him at his graduation, hugging me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. "Where did that boy go?" I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady the storm building inside me. All my life, I believed love meant sacrifice. I thought if I just gave enough, gave my time, gave my savings, gave my home, they'd see my worth. But in that moment, sitting there with Janet, I finally saw the truth: love without respect isn't really love. It's just a transaction. A deal. Janet wiped her eyes. "What are you going to do now?" she asked gently. I lifted my chin. Something steady and strong stirred inside me, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. "I'm going to get my life back," I said. I stood up and smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt. My body still ached, but something inside me felt lighter. Stronger. Janet nodded with a proud smile and whispered, "About time." I walked through the quiet streets downtown. The shops were already closed for the night, their windows dark. My suitcase felt heavier with every step, and my shoulders ached from carrying it so far. But strangely, my steps felt firm, like each one was bringing me closer to a part of myself I thought I'd lost. Eventually, I stopped in front of an old red brick building, squeezed between a tiny flower shop and an art gallery. A faded sign above the door read, Studio 7. Years ago, before I gave up everything for my family, I used to work part-time at a community art center. The director had liked me so much that she helped me get a small studio apartment through a staff housing program. I had kept it all these years, paid the bare minimum, barely used it, almost forgot it existed. But that night, when I reached into my purse, the key was still there, tucked in the corner like a secret I'd saved just for this moment. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled like old paint and pressed flowers. The windows were dusty. The room was simple, a tiny bed, a kitchenette, a worn-out armchair, but it felt like peace. I set my suitcase down, walked to the window, and looked out over the quiet alley below. For the first time all day, I took a full breath, and it didn't feel like breathing through broken glass. I kicked off my shoes and let my sore feet press against the cool floor. No yelling. No silent treatments. No walking on eggshells just to protect someone else's pride. Just me. And quiet. I closed my eyes and heard my husband's voice in my mind, steady and kind. Quiet doesn't mean weak, Martha. Remember that. And that's when the plan came together in my mind. Not revenge. Not some messy fight in front of the neighbors. No, something softer. Smarter. I'd let them think they'd won. That I was gone for good. Meanwhile, I'd gather every document I needed, old tax records, the marriage certificate, the property deed, everything that proved the house was still legally mine. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found his name, Richard. My husband's best friend. A retired lawyer. I hadn't called him in years. My finger hovered over the button for a moment. Then I pressed it. He picked up after just 2 rings. His voice was groggy. Martha? Is everything all right? A small smile crept across my face. My voice felt steady for the first time all day. Richard, I said softly. I think I'm going to need your help. Can you meet me tomorrow? He didn't ask a single question. Okay, he said. I stood up, stretched, and felt the tightness in my back start to ease. I shuffled over to the little kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. It hissed to life. I leaned on the counter and stared down at the chipped tiles, hearing my husband's voice one more time, from one of our late-night talks at the kitchen table. Don't sign away what's yours, not even to family. Love without respect isn't love at all. Back then, I thought he was just being cautious. Now I knew he was right. I used to believe my son would never betray me. I thought family meant something, that love ran deeper than money. But as the kettle hissed and the steam curled through the quiet of that small studio kitchen, I finally understood every warning I'd ignored. I thought back to the day he asked me to put his name on the house deed, just for tax reasons, he said. To protect the family's future, he promised. I remembered how gentle his voice was, how he smiled as if he only had my best interest at heart. But now, every signature on those papers felt like a trap, like a rope they'd slowly wrapped around my neck, tightening it while I smiled and thanked them for helping me breathe. I carried my tea to the little table by the window and opened an old notebook I had found in a dusty box the night before. The pages were yellowed and curled at the corners, the ink faded, but the handwriting was still there, my husband's steady hand, his careful notes about house repairs, expenses, contacts for our lawyer. Each line felt like a quiet whisper from him, you're not alone. You're not powerless. And he was right. I knew this wouldn't be easy. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd roll over, cry quietly, and disappear. But they didn't know what I had given up to keep that house standing. The jobs I turned down. The friends I drifted from. The nights I stayed awake pacing the floor, wondering how I'd pay the mortgage when my husband was too sick to work. That house wasn't just a building, it was my life's work. Every brick held a memory. A calm, steady fire lit up inside me as I flipped through those pages, highlighting names and underlining dates. My hands didn't shake anymore. The next morning, I got to the downtown cafe early. I was wearing my old brown coat, buttoned up even though the spring air was already warming. The place was hidden behind a little bookstore, the kind of cozy corner you only found if you knew where to look. It smelled like roasted coffee beans and something sweet baking in the back. I found a spot by the window and ordered jasmine tea. People passed by outside, walking dogs, carrying shopping bags, sipping their morning drinks. And I sat there, quiet, still, but not small. Richard walked in a few minutes later. He looked a bit older than I remembered, his blazer slightly wrinkled, his old leather briefcase worn at the corners, but his eyes were just as sharp as ever. He spotted me and smiled warmly. Martha, he said, sitting down across from me, you look different. Stronger. I gave a soft laugh, surprised by how right that felt. Maybe I am, I said. We didn't speak for a few minutes. Just sat there, wrapped in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. When our drinks came, I took a deep breath and pulled out the folder I'd prepared, the old deeds, the tax forms, the marriage certificate. Richard listened carefully as I explained everything, the note on the door, my belongings dumped on the lawn, the silence from my son. I watched his face shift from surprise to something else, a quiet anger, steady and controlled. They thought you wouldn't fight back, he said, tapping one of the documents. But these are still in your name. The main title hasn't changed. They can't sell the house without your signature. A slow warmth spread through my chest. Not relief exactly, but something stronger, the first spark of real power. We'll file an injunction right away, Richard said. That'll freeze any transfer attempts. Then we'll clarify full ownership in court and serve them legal notice. You'll be back in control. I nodded, each word soaking into me like rain into dry ground. And then he looked me straight in the eye and said quietly, but Martha, you need to be ready. When they realize you're not backing down, they're going to come harder. I swallowed hard. The weight of it sat heavy on my chest, but this time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt sharp. Ready. Let them come, I said, my voice steady. They already took everything they could from me. There's nothing left for them to break. We went through every page together. Richard scribbled notes, underlined dates. I glanced at the window beside me and caught my reflection. I hardly recognized the woman looking back, same lines on her face, same gray streaks in her hair, but behind her eyes, there was something solid. Something unshakable. I thought of the life they tried to steal from me, evenings tending roses, the smell of fresh bread in the oven, my grandson's laughter echoing through the halls. That house was built on love, not greed. They didn't deserve it. As we finished reviewing the paperwork, Richard patted my hand gently and gave a small nod. You're doing the right thing, Martha, he said. It's time. And I believed him. They found out you're not the woman they thought you were. I gave his hand a little squeeze and felt stronger than I had in years. When I stepped out of the cafe into the warm morning sun, it was like a jolt of energy ran through me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was finally standing up for myself. That night, I was back at my little studio, neatly folding documents when my phone buzzed. My son's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a second, my thumb hovering over the answer button. A part of me wanted to let it ring and keep the peaceful silence I'd finally found. But I picked up. Mom, he said right away. His voice was tight, like he was trying hard to sound worried. Where are you? We've been so concerned. I almost laughed. Concerned? After throwing me out like an old broken chair, now he was pretending to care? I'm fine, I said flatly. I gave him nothing, no emotion, no opening. There was a pause. I imagined him pacing the floor, running his hands through his hair the way he always did when he was lying. Listen, he said, things got heated. None of us meant for it to go that far. Can we just meet? Just talk? I didn't trust him, but I said yes. I wanted to look him in the eye when he realized what he'd thrown away. We agreed to meet at a small diner downtown, the same place where I first heard the truth from Janet. I got there early and picked a booth by the window. The waitress brought over a cup of tea, and I watched the steam curl in the air. I thought of all the meals I'd made for him, the times I'd held him when he was just a scared little boy. He came in looking exhausted, with his wife trailing close behind, sharp-eyed and alert. They slid into the booth across from me like they were stepping onto a stage. Mom, he began, reaching for my hand. I pulled it away and rested it in my lap. His eyes flickered. We wanted to apologize, he said quickly, like he had rehearsed it. It was all a big misunderstanding. We thought it would be easier if easier for who? I cut in. My voice was calm, but my words cut through his act like a knife. He looked at his wife, who jumped in without missing a beat. We've just been under so much stress, she said in that sweet, fake voice. My parents have nowhere to go, and, well, we thought since you're so independent now, maybe you wouldn't mind staying somewhere else for a while. I watched her closely. Her words were soft, but they slipped around the truth like oil on water. Then she pulled out a thick envelope from her purse. These are the final property transfer papers, she said smoothly. If you sign now, we can all move forward. As a family. I looked at that envelope for a long time. My hands itched to rip it up right there. But instead, I smiled faintly and slid it back toward her. I'll think about it, I said calmly. She forced a little laugh, but I saw the cold edge in her eyes. Of course. We knew you'd be reasonable. For the first time, my son really looked at me. And for a brief second, I saw it, guilt? Or maybe just the shock of realizing he didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of him anymore. I finished my tea and stood up before they could say anything else. As I walked away, I heard her hiss, "What does she mean she'll think about it? She's supposed to sign today." I pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool evening air, feeling a quiet kind of victory swell inside me. Let them panic. Let them worry. They thought they could buy me off with one last signature. But they were wrong. I wasn't theirs to control anymore. Back at my studio, I tossed the envelope onto the table like it was a pile of spoiled food. I just stood there, staring at it. Every word, every tiny clause on those papers was a betrayal in black and white. But I wasn't angry anymore. Just clear. I walked into the kitchen and set water to boil. The kettle screamed, but I moved slowly, purposefully. I scooped out some jasmine tea leaves from an old tin and let them steep. The soft floral smell filled the room. As I waited, I pulled out a photo album I had rescued from the lawn that awful day. I flipped through it gently. There was my husband in the garden, proudly holding a basket of tomatoes. My grandson, his little face glowing, holding a sparkler one summer night. I held my hand over the photo and smiled. Some things, real things, can't be stolen. As I looked at the pictures, something inside me shifted. For the first time since that terrible day, I didn't feel pain. I felt solid, grounded, like I finally knew where I stood. That's when I truly understood, I hadn't just lost a house. I had let go of the fantasy of family. They showed me, in the hardest and cruelest way, that love without respect is just another kind of prison. I took a sip of tea and let the warmth spread through my chest. Then I picked up my phone and called Richard. My voice was steady, no shaking this time. "Richard," I said, calm and clear, "I'd like to go over the papers again tomorrow. I'm ready to sell the house. But this time, it's on my terms." There was a pause before he answered, his voice soft but impressed. "You're sure?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I've spent my whole life fixing things for people who never said thank you. This is mine. I get to choose how the story ends." I hung up and set the phone down carefully, almost like it was something sacred. Then I walked back to the table, picked up a pair of scissors, and began cutting through the stack of unsigned transfer documents. With each snip, I felt like I was slicing through the invisible strings they had tied around me. When I finished, I tossed the pieces into the trash, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and sat down. I took another slow sip of tea. My fingers were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a strange new feeling, excitement. That tiny kitchen, with its cracked tiles and dusty blinds, felt more powerful than that huge house ever did. That house had shiny floors and fake smiles, but here, I had peace. I glanced back at the photo album and gently touched the picture of my grandson's smiling face. "They'll miss me," I whispered into the quiet room. But only because I finally said no. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and listened to the sounds outside, car horns, music from a passing window, the gentle hum of strangers going about their lives. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like just a mother, or a wife, or someone holding everyone else together. I felt like me. I felt like Martha. The next morning, I got up before the sun peeked over the rooftops. I grabbed my purse and the old manila folder holding my property papers and headed to Richard's office downtown. He greeted me with a tired but real smile and led me inside before the city had fully woken up. We spread the documents across his big wooden desk. "We'll move fast," he said, tapping the folder. "I've got a realtor friend I trust. They can list it quietly. Your family won't know until it's already done." I nodded, each word sinking into my bones like truth. As he made calls, I sat by the window in a soft leather chair, watching early commuters rush down the streets below. I used to think those crowds didn't include me, that I was too old, too invisible. But not today. Today, I felt more alive than all of them. When Richard finally hung up, he looked over his glasses and said, "It's done. The house is listed, quietly, for now. But it won't take long. That place is worth more than they ever understood." I let out a long breath, feeling my shoulders drop for the first time in days. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching just a little. He shook his head. His voice was warm but serious. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a ways to go. But Martha, I'm proud of you." That meant more than I expected. On my walk home, I stopped by a little fabric shop. I hadn't touched my sewing things in years, but I suddenly missed that quiet focus. Back in my studio, I pulled out a patchwork quilt I'd started ages ago. I spread it on the table, ran my fingers over the faded fabric, and began stitching. The needle moved in and out of the cloth, steady, sure, like the choices I was finally making in my life. By late afternoon, my studio felt alive again. Bits of thread were scattered across the table, soft music played from an old radio, and the scent of jasmine tea drifted from my cup. I knew they would find out what I'd done. I knew they'd be angry, dramatic, maybe even scared. But in that small room, surrounded by fabric, quiet music, and my own steady breath, I felt completely untouchable. Being alone wasn't something to fear anymore. It was a gift. A freedom they unknowingly gave me when they showed me who they really were. I held up the quilt square to the fading light and smiled, not the kind of smile you fake for company, but the real kind. The kind that blooms when you finally take your life back. And for the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to fix anyone else's world. I was living in my own. I woke up before the sun and wrapped myself in my old, soft robe. The house was quiet as I brewed a pot of tea and sat by the window with the quilt spread across my lap. My hands stitched slowly while my thoughts drifted. It felt like I wasn't just fixing old fabric, I was sewing little pieces of myself back together. A few days later, I walked into Richard's office again. But this time, I stood taller. My shoulders were back, and I held my head high, higher than I had in years. Richard stood up as I entered, his eyes scanning my face like he didn't quite recognize me. "Martha," he said, a surprised smile creeping onto his face, "you look lighter." I smiled gently and set my bag down on the chair beside me. "That's because I finally put the weight down," I said. He nodded and motioned for me to sit. We spread the last stack of papers across his big wooden desk. "These," he said, tapping the folder, "are the final sale documents. Once you sign, the house will be officially sold. The money will go straight to your account." I looked at the pages for a moment, running my fingers along the smooth edges. A rush of memories came to me, my grandson running barefoot through the kitchen, my husband humming while he chopped vegetables, my son's carefree laugh in the backyard when he was little. But just as quickly, that warmth faded, replaced by the sting of the note they'd left me, "Don't make a scene." I took a deep breath and picked up the pen. My signature came out steady, no hesitation. When I finished, I laid the pen down slowly. A strange thrill ran through me, like I had just jumped off a cliff, but instead of falling, I was flying. Richard looked at me with quiet pride. "It's official," he said. "The house is no longer theirs. They can't touch it now. You did it, Martha." I gave a small, sure smile. "I didn't just do it for me," I said softly. "I did it for every woman who was told to keep quiet, to give up everything, to fade into the background." His eyes softened, and he gently placed his hand over mine. "You're free now," he said. Those words rang in my head like church bells. 1 week later, on a rainy afternoon, the knock came at their door. It was the kind of rain that sinks deep into your bones, cold, steady, impossible to ignore. But they had nowhere to run from what was coming. A court bailiff stood on their porch, flanked by 2 police officers. He held the official eviction notice in one gloved hand. My son opened the door first. From where I stood on the sidewalk, I could see the color drain from his face. His mouth opened and shut like a fish, struggling for air. His wife appeared behind him, her face tight with confusion and disbelief. "Mr. and Mrs. Dalton?" the bailiff asked politely, like he was confirming a dinner reservation. They nodded slowly, too stunned to speak. The bailiff unfolded the paper and began reading in a calm, steady voice. "This residence has been legally sold. You are required to vacate the premises within 30 days. Failure to do so will result in court-ordered removal." My daughter-in-law made a sound, somewhere between a scream and a gasp, and grabbed the doorframe like it could hold her up. Behind them, I saw my living room. The same walls where my husband's fishing hat once hung. The fireplace where I had shown my grandson how to toast marshmallows on cold winter nights. But I didn't feel sadness. Only a deep, quiet sense of certainty. This was right. Neighbors began to gather, peeking out from under umbrellas. Some whispered. Others filmed with their phones. I spotted Mrs. Holbrook across the street, her eyes wide in shock. My son finally found his voice. This has to be a mistake," he said, stepping forward, panicked. "My mother would never." The bailiff handed him a thick envelope. "All legal documents are inside. Ownership transfer. Sale confirmation. Eviction authorization. You can review them with your lawyer." My son's hands trembled so badly. The envelope nearly slipped into a puddle. I stood quietly on the corner, umbrella resting lightly on my shoulder. The rain slid down my face, mixing with a single tear I didn't bother to wipe away. Not because I was sad, but because it felt like the final cleanse. The last drop washing away years of sacrifice that had slowly become chains. My daughter-in-law sank to the doorstep, crying openly now. My son stood over her, pale and silent, gripping the papers like they were the only thing holding him upright. And I just stood there, calm, steady, watching it all unfold. Not out of revenge, but out of truth. Because they finally had to face what I had already learned: you can't steal someone's strength and expect them to stay weak forever. The bailiff turned and pinned the eviction notice to the front door. The officers stayed on either side of him, quiet but alert, there to make sure everything happened by the book. I stood across the street for a moment longer, breathing in the thick, rainy air. Then I turned and walked away, each step strong, my back straighter than it had been in years. They had tried to bury me in guilt and shame. But I hadn't been buried, I had been planted. And now? I was blooming. The next day, I asked them to meet me at a cafe downtown. But not just any cafe, the busiest one on Main Street. The kind of place where young people tapped away on laptops and old friends gossiped over coffee. I got there early and chose a table right in the center, where everyone could see us. I wore my best navy coat and the pearl brooch I hadn't touched since my husband's funeral. When they walked in, they looked like they hadn't slept in days. My son's eyes darted around the room like he was searching for an escape. His wife clutched her expensive purse like it might save her. I calmly motioned to the seats across from me. They sat without a word. You could feel the tension in the air, even the barista stopped mid-steam. I reached into my handbag and slid a thin envelope across the table. These, I said, my voice low but steady, are the final legal papers. The house is officially sold. It's no longer yours. And you have no right to fight it. My son grabbed the envelope with shaking hands. His wife burst into tears, fat streaks of mascara trailing down her cheeks. I watched them both without blinking. Then, I reached into my purse again and took out a small check, placing it gently on top of the envelope. This is a moving allowance, I said. It's symbolic, enough for a few nights in a motel and some meals. Just until you figure out what to do next. My daughter-in-law let out a choked sob and dropped her head into her hands. My son looked up at me. Really looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, full of panic. Mom, please. We didn't mean. We thought. I held up a hand. No, I said firmly. You made your choices. You loved the house more than you loved me. You thought I was too weak to fight back. But you were wrong. The whole cafe had gone silent. A young woman at the next table froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. My son reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled it back. You only miss me now because I finally said. No, I said, locking eyes with him one last time. I took my time finishing my tea, savoring every sip as they sat slumped across from me, their world falling apart. When I stood up, I placed a few bills on the table for my tea and walked out without looking back. Behind me, I heard her sobbing, his muffled pleas, and the quiet gasps of strangers. But I didn't turn around. Outside, the city felt big and open, like it had been waiting for me. The air was crisp and cool, stinging just a little in my chest as I breathed in. But it felt good, like fresh air after a storm. I didn't go home right away. I wandered through the streets, past bookstores, flower carts, and crowded corners. The sunlight warmed my face. My steps were light, almost like I was floating. Eventually, I made my way to Richard's office. He looked up, surprised. Martha, he said, standing, is everything okay? I nodded and closed the door behind me. I want to make one more change, I said, my voice calm, but with a fierce finality underneath. I sat down and pulled out the thick folder with all my financial documents. I want to redirect everything, the inheritance, the money from the house. Set up a trust fund for people who actually need help. Seniors with no one. Women escaping bad situations. I'm done handing my life over to people who only saw me as a bank account. Richard blinked, clearly moved. Then a slow, proud smile spread across his face. You're sure? He asked gently. I looked him in the eyes. They only ever loved my money, I said. Now they won't have either. He nodded and got to work right away. We spent the next hour reviewing everything. Every time I signed a page, I felt another chain fall away. When I signed the final document, Richard let out a breath like he'd been holding it for hours. I sat back in the chair, feeling lighter than I had in decades. And for the first time, I was the one writing the ending to my story. It's done, he said. They'll get the official notice tonight. I stood up and picked up my bag. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt light, like a huge weight had finally lifted off my shoulders. Thank you, I whispered, my voice shaking. That little tremble? It wasn't from being scared. It was from finally feeling free. He nodded, his eyes a little glassy. You did something amazing today, Martha. I left the office just as the sky started glowing orange with the sunset. That evening, the notice arrived at the cheap motel where they were staying. A courier handed them the envelope. Inside was a formal letter that made everything clear. They weren't getting a single penny. No inheritance. No backup plan. Just the consequences of their own selfish choices. I imagined the scene, my son ripping the papers in half, yelling. His wife sinking to the floor, crying into her expensive sweater. The panic must have hit them hard. That night, my phone lit up over and over. His name flashing on the screen again and again. I didn't pick up. Then came the messages. Mom, please. We need to talk. You can't just leave us like this. We made mistakes, but we're still family. I didn't reply. I just sat quietly in my little kitchen, folding a quilt I'd been working on, smoothing each corner like I had all the time in the world. By morning, they were banging on my door, yelling through the thin walls of my small apartment. "Mom, please. We can fix this. You can't leave us out here like this." Their voices weren't filled with love. They were filled with fear of losing their comfort, their easy life. The world wasn't going to bend for them anymore, and that terrified them. Still, I didn't move. I didn't even look at the door. Eventually, the banging turned into soft pleading. My daughter-in-law's voice cracked. "Please, we'll do anything. Just think of your grandson." I almost laughed, sharp and bitter, but I held it in. They only remembered me when I said no. When I stopped giving. After a while, their cries turned into tired sobs. Then came silence. I heard them walk away, probably heading back to that sad motel, heads low, avoiding eye contact with the neighbors. But the neighbors were already talking. Gossip spreads fast, especially after something like an eviction. I heard Mrs. Holbrook at the corner store, shocked. After everything she did for them? They tossed her out like an old rug. Someone else added, "You can't treat people like garbage and expect nothing to happen." It was ironic, really. I used to make myself small, always trying to keep the peace, trying not to embarrass them. Now, without saying a word, my silence was louder than anything. My story was out there, echoing down every street. And they were alone. Truly alone. Later that day, I blocked their numbers. I deleted all the voicemails without listening. I shut every door they might try to sneak back through. I wasn't angry. That would mean I still cared. But I didn't. I felt nothing. And that nothing felt good. Clean. Quiet. Peaceful. I sat back down with my cup of tea, unfolded my quilt. Again, and for the first time, everything inside me felt like it was finally where it belonged. No more fake family dinners. No more pretending on holidays. Just me. And that was enough. Outside, the city kept moving, busy and alive. And for the first time in my life, so did I. In the weeks that followed, I made my little studio feel like a real alma. One afternoon, as I watered a tiny pot of herbs on the windowsill, I looked out at the glowing skyline, and I didn't feel sad about the house I left behind. Not one bit.